My name is Lisa Spar. I am the Associate Director of the Law Library and I teach Advanced Legal Research. The goal for this video is to provide you basic steps on how to tackle a research question. A quick explanation on how the video works. The video will stop at spots and ask a question. Once you answer the question, click on Continue and the video will resume. We are looking at a pile of puzzle pieces in order to discuss research strategy because research can be like a puzzle. You need to find the right piece and put it in the right place. And sometimes the available research information can feel like you are looking at a 5,000-piece puzzle with all of the pieces looking identical. So, just as putting together a puzzle has a strategy, you find the edge pieces and create the frame, approaching a research project also has a strategy. The first question I like to ask is why? Why do you care? Why do you even need to learn how to do legal research or a research strategy? We can see here the results of a study done a few years ago where they found that 85% of new attorneys were expected to have strong legal research skills. And on top of that, the employers of those new attorneys may or may not provide formal training. So this means you need to develop your research skills in law school. And on top of that, this study also shows that new attorneys will be spending likely 1/3 of their time doing legal research. So you may be asking yourself, can't I just use AI? If you've heard of AI by now, I imagine that you've also heard about hallucinations. Artificial intelligence, even legal database AI, can make stuff up. So to use AI effectively and identify and avoid hallucinations, you need to understand the resources and how they relate to one another. You need to understand what AI is using. So as a reminder, for legal writing, you may not use AI until your professor says it is okay. So let's talk about a research strategy. To do this, we're going to use a hypothetical. You are going to be seeing a lot of hypotheticals throughout law school. So let's take a look at this one. This is also on page 1 of your handout. That's the handout your professor sent to you. So here we have our hypothetical in which Joe Sixpack attended a raucous party at his friend's Hofstra campus apartment last week. Hofstra, of course, is a private school. Joe rode his bicycle to and from the party. After the party, Joe was biking his way back to his campus dorm room when he was pulled over by county police on one of the streets around campus. The police stopped Joe because he appeared to be driving erratically on his bicycle. The police administered a breathalyzer test and found that he exceeded the legal limit for the blood alcohol level while driving in New York. Joe was arrested and his bicycle was impounded. So for now, we will not be researching the issues relating to the legality of the breathalyzer test and results. You are clerking for an attorney in New York handling this case. She asks you to research the issue of whether Joe can be charged for driving his bicycle while intoxicated under New York law. So, before you put fingers to keyboard, you need to know what those fingers are going to type. So you need to determine what is the issue. What are the important facts? What aspects of the issue do we need to research? One way to do this is to ask yourself, what is the problem? Why is the client seeking out an attorney? And the answer seems pretty clearly that Joe was driving his bicycle while over the limit. Another way of stating that is he was drunk or intoxicated. So what aspects of the facts are important? Is the fact that it happened at a campus apartment important? Probably not. Does it matter that Joe was driving his bike after drinking? Absolutely. How can you tell which facts are going to be important and which aren't? You will be learning how to analyze facts and determine the issue from your wonderful legal analysis, research, and writing professor. They are going to teach you the fundamentals of what we call in law school issue spotting, and you're going to be doing issue spotting throughout your 3 years in law school. So one technique that you can use is this series of questions on page 2 of your handout. So we've kind of done this already. We've answered the who, of course, that's Joe. You're not really going to search for the name Joe, right? You're going to search for who Joe is, which is a bicyclist. What happened? He was riding his bike while intoxicated or drunk. A couple of the questions we didn't answer, when and where, are very important. The when was last week, and that's important because of statutes of limitations questions. You'll be learning about statutes of limitations in your civil procedure class. The where is also really important because you always need to keep in mind what jurisdiction you're in. And of course, we know that we are in New York. We've kind of already answered the why question, and you may want to start to think about other legal theories. This is another series of questions you can use. You can mix and match. You don't have to answer all of the questions. This is just a tool to help you think about the issue. So back here looking at our hypothetical, I'm going to make it easy for you since you're just starting out in law school and give you your issue statement. So it asks, under New York law, can a person be charged with driving while intoxicated or other similar offense where that person is riding a bicycle while intoxicated? All right, so how are we going to research this issue? I've promised to give you the basic steps for research, and here they are, the essential elements of the research process. This is also on page 1 of your handout. So, step 1, frame the questions. That's exactly what we've just done with issue spotting. And develop your search terms. You need now really to think about, as I said, what words are you going to type? Put fingers to keyboard and type. What will be your search terms? We will review possible answers shortly. Now, let's take a look at step 2. Step 2 tells us we need to identify, prioritize, and consult relevant sources. In other words, this is where we need to do the research. So our question is, how? To answer that question, we're going to look a little bit further down on page 2 of your handout and look at the research pyramid. And like any good pyramid, we lay the foundation. And for research, our foundation is secondary sources. What do I mean by secondary sources? I like to think of secondary sources as stuff to help you find and understand the law. What do I mean by stuff? Well, as it says here, we're going to build this foundation with legal encyclopedias. That's exactly what it sounds like, encyclopedias that are just about the law. Also, law review articles. These are articles published in journals written by experts in the field, frequently your professors. Treatises. Treatises is just a fancy name for books, also on a particular subject, also written by experts, and also frequently by your professors. ALR annotations. ALR stands for American Law Reports. It's a specialized type of legal research resource we will be looking at in a few minutes. Other specialized legal resources include restatements and practice aids. So these different types of secondary sources will help us find and understand the law. What is the law? The law is primary authorities. And as it says here, you want to examine your primary authority, looking for controlling authority in your jurisdiction. Let's explore primary authority a little bit more. To do that, I'm going to go to page 3 of your handout and look at sources of the law. The sources of the law, as we see here, are the 3 branches of government. So we have the legislative branch, and for the federal level, we have Congress, and for New York State, we have the Assembly and Senate as the legislative branch. The legislative branch in New York, their laws are found in something called McKinney's. We will be talking about McKinney's a little bit later. We also have the executive branch, and of course the executive branch includes the president and agencies and the federal level and the governor and New York State agencies for New York. And finally, we have judicial decisions or opinions. And you've probably already been reading cases, and of course they can be federal courts that issue decisions, but also state courts can issue judicial decisions. I am going to take a little detour here and show you page 4 of your handout, which are legal abbreviations. You may have been reading cases with lots of abbreviations that may seem confusing, so I have provided for you some abbreviations here that will hopefully make whatever you're reading less confusing. Back to our pyramid on page 2, we've discussed primary authorities. The last part of our pyramid, our last step, is going to be to update and validate our research. So we want to make sure that any primary authority upon which we are relying is entirely updated and is still valid. You might notice here on page 2, just below our research pyramid, we have a box which suggests that smart folks take notes. This is a very important step throughout your research, is to jot down when you find something worth checking. It may be that you get a good reference that you want to go back to later. It may be that you get interrupted in your research and can't get back to it for a week or two. If you are taking notes throughout, you will save yourself a whole lot of time. So using our strategy from our research pyramid, we will start with secondary sources. All right then, what secondary source are we going to start with? Where are we going to go first? I'm going to guess that some of you might be thinking Google. And you know what? So am I. Google is a great place to start. The thing about Google is you never, ever, ever want to stop there. Why do I say that? Well, let's take a look at some results. As you can see here, I've used the terms drunk bicycling. So these were the search terms I decided to start with. You might have decided that bicycling while intoxicated were good terms to start with. That would be perfectly good too. In fact, I would probably try both here in Google, because one of the advantages of Google is that it is free and so easy to use. So in looking at our results, we see here up at top, New York law on biking while intoxicated. That sounds pretty relevant, right? When I'm looking at Google results, or really results from any resource, I'm always going to look at the source. So here I see the web address is something bicycle accident something or other. So let's take a look at what this result shows us. So here we see a law firm. Now the thing about law firm websites, and I know that from the name up here, the thing about law firm websites is that law firms put up websites not to help law students do research. Unfortunately, law firms put up websites in order to get clients. What this means from a research perspective is that you cannot rely on law firm sites. Maybe it is that they only put up one side of an issue because they're trying to attract particular clients. It may be that they don't put up all the complete information. It may even be that they put up inaccurate information. So why even look at a law firm website? Well, you look at a law firm website to see if it can give you any clues as to what the relevant law might be. It might give you, law firm sites might give you clues as to good terminology to use. So looking at this site, it tells me that some states riding on a bicycle under the influence can lead to DUI charges the same as a motorist. It says, however, in New York, you will not be charged for DUI for riding a bicycle while drunk. Again, that sounds pretty definitive, but you cannot rely on a law firm site. You need to find primary authority that will give you confidence that that is the answer. But what this firm site does tell us is that DUI is a relevant concept for us, and we want to investigate that for New York law. So as a smart folk who takes notes, I'm going to write down, investigate DUI for New York. Looking here again at our Google results, we see another result from FindLaw. Again, I always look at the source. It's findlaw.com. FindLaw is a legal portal, meaning that it pulls together legal information and gives you links to all over the web. But we see here something, biking under influence. Again, Google is so easy, it's worth taking a look at. So I'm clicking on that link. Here we see an article from FindLaw, biking under the influence. And here is a great example of why using Google can be useful. This article is going to give us the basics, letting us know that DWI and DUI is relevant. It's also letting us know that whether a vehicle is a motor vehicle and how that is defined is going to be important. And once again, FindLaw even references New York does not charge intoxicated biking, as the device must have a motor to fall under state DUI laws. Again, this is really useful. I'm never ever going to cite to FindLaw, but I now know that I need to look at the New York DUI laws and figure out whether a bicycle is in fact a motor vehicle or not. According to everything we've seen so far, it isn't, but we need to be absolutely sure by finding the relevant primary sources. Now that we've investigated Google, we need to check legal secondary sources. Even though we think we found a pretty good answer on Google, as I said before, we absolutely cannot stop there, and we cannot even rely on those results. So by going to legal secondary sources, on much more reliable sources, we can make sure what we learned is correct, and we can also get some help in understanding what those primary sources are, help in finding those primary sources, as well as any additional things we need to think about. Those are all of the reasons, amongst many more, that we want to start in secondary sources. So looking here on Westlaw, you can also use Lexis to do the exact same thing, looking at secondary sources. Let's take a look at content types, and let's go to secondary sources. Since I know that's what I want to research or want to look in, I want to narrow to secondary sources so I don't get sidetracked by other types of resources. And I'm going to try my same search terms, drunk bicycling. I can also use bicycling while intoxicated. And as you can see, as I'm typing my search terms, Westlaw comes up with some suggestions. Lexis would do the same thing. And taking a look at this suggestion, operation of bicycle as within drunk driving statute, that looks pretty promising. As a smart folk who takes notes, I'm going to jot that down to check later on and continue on with my search to see what kind of secondary sources we can find. Now you may have noticed that I did not specify New York. I still need to get an overall understanding of how the law works on this issue. So I like to start in secondary sources without narrowing to my jurisdiction, and once I start to get an understanding, then I will narrow to that jurisdiction. So let's take a look at our results. And again, it's always critical to check the resource. So here I see operation of bicycle under the influence. That looks really good, right? Except checking our resource, I see that's California jurisprudence. When you see the word jurisprudence in a title, think encyclopedia. So this is a California encyclopedia on the California law. That sounds really useful, but it's California. That's not going to help us. Second one is Florida jurisprudence. Same issue. Florida's not going to help us. Third one's Pennsylvania. Again, not going to help us. Finally, we get down to, hey, look, this is actually that ALR article. Again, ALR stands for American Law Reports. That ALR article, Westlaw suggested, operation of bicycles. So that's a general resource that covers the entire country. So I'm going to take a look at ALR. ALR, if you can find an ALR article or section on your issue, can be super useful. Why do I say that? Well, as we take a look, we see that ALR basically gives us an outline of the issues regarding our topic, bicycle, as within drunk driving statute. The other great thing about ALR is it will give you a listing of jurisdictions, so you can go specifically and see what ALR tells us about our jurisdiction. Unfortunately, ALR doesn't list our jurisdiction, New York, but it's still useful to get an overall general understanding of the issue. In addition, it might also give us other questions to ask as well as other terminology to use. So what ALR tells us is that some courts have held that bicycle riders are subject to arrest for drunk driving. And then it says here in the next paragraph, on the other hand, it has been held bicycle riding did not fall within the purview of drunk driving statute for the operators of vehicles, since devices powered by humans are excluded from the definition of vehicle. So we're getting some confirmation that what we saw in Google is actually correct, that we need to look into the drunk driving primary authorities, drunk driving statutes, and we also need to think about the definition of vehicle. So back here on my search results page, now I am ready to see if we can find anything New York, and to see if we can find anything else that might be useful. So I can do that here after my search, either under publication type or publication name. And so narrowing or filtering under publication name, I see I can filter to New York jurisprudence. Again, jurisprudence is an encyclopedia, so an encyclopedia on New York law. That sounds like that could be really useful. I might actually also look at American jurisprudence. That's again for the whole country, but again, maybe it can give me some extra understanding. And once I choose my filters, I'm going to apply. And looking at my results from American jurisprudence, again, the general encyclopedia, I get some more background on bicycles, some more background generally on motor vehicle as defined by statutes, and then here in New York jurisprudence, some general rights and duties. I will hope you'll take my word that after looking at these three sections, it really didn't add much to our understanding. So we now realize we need to figure out what New York law says about drunk driving and whether or not bicycles can be defined under the drunk driving statutes. So to do that, I still need to get further understanding, so I'm still going to stay in secondary sources, but this time I am going to narrow to New York. And once I've narrowed to New York, I will look for drunk driving because I know that's the relevant statutory or area of law that I need to research. Westlaw will give me recommendations for content. None of these are jumping out at me and saying New York law on drunk driving, so I'm going to go ahead and run my search. Looking at my results for drunk driving, I see I get a lot of sections called research references, research references, research references. That doesn't sound very useful. However, as I always do, I'm going to look at the source where it comes from. I see handling the DWI case in New York. That sounds exactly on point, exactly what we need help with. So when I see a section that's not very useful, but a resource that sounds super useful, I'm going to show you a really, really useful research tip. So when you see that not so useful section, but really useful resource, click on the section. Here in the section, we see we are now in that resource, handling the DWI case in New York. And then the really useful tip is to go to the table of contents and view the full table of contents. And once I get to the full table of contents, I'm just going to scan through and see what looks useful. So here, part 1, stop and arrest, that seems to apply. So I'm going to expand that by clicking on the plus sign and then see what comes under there. So I see Chapter 1, issues from the stop to the arrest, and Chapter 2, operation. Both sound like that they might be relevant. So again, I'm going to expand out. I'll scan through Chapter 1, nothing particularly useful. I might want to check in general. looking at Chapter 2. Again, I might want to check in general, and then what is a motor vehicle? Both of these sections look promising. So let's take a look at section 2.1 in general. Again, that's not very specific, but maybe it will give us a general understanding as it suggests. And here we see two of the essential elements of a VTL 1192 charge. I'll explain VTL 1192 in a moment, are that the defendant operate a motor vehicle. So again, we see that concept of what is a motor vehicle is going to be critical. We can go over here on the left to see section 2.2. Here we see what is a motor vehicle, as we've learned is a very important concept, and we see that the definition of what constitutes a motor vehicle is found in VTL 125, again I'll explain shortly, which provides every vehicle operated on a public highway which is propelled by any power other than muscular power. So now we see in New York, sure enough, in order for a vehicle to be considered a motor vehicle, it should not be propelled by muscular power. And it's looking like we need to have a motor vehicle in order to be able to apply a DUI or DWI charge. So our secondary source has pointed us to these VTL sections, 125 and the other one, which we will need to investigate, and which will hopefully get us closer to our answer. Before we investigate those VTL sections, let's step back and see how we're doing on our strategy. So we're identifying, prioritizing, and consulting relevant sources. Our next step while we're doing that is to make sure your research is responsive to the questions presented. A lot of times you'll read lots of different resources that may send you down rabbit holes or send you into tangents that aren't strictly relevant. In order to save yourself a lot of time and some frustration throughout your research process, you always want to have somewhere in the middle of your mind thinking about, is this my actual question, or am I getting sidetracked by ancillary or other non-essential questions? Back here on Westlaw, looking at handling the DWI case in New York, our treatise on New York law for drunk driving. We're back here in section 2.1, and remember we saw this reference to VTL 1192. So now let's investigate this section. VTL stands for Vehicle and Traffic Law, and Vehicle and Traffic Law is a title within McKinney's Consolidated Laws. Remember when we were looking at the sources of the law chart, I explained that McKinney's is the source for New York legislation. So this is the primary legislative source for New York law. So looking at VTL 1192, we see that this is operating a motor vehicle while under the influence. So here is the statutory section for DWI and DUI. When looking at a statutory or code section, it is always critical, really important to look at the heading. You want to make sure that the section you are looking at addresses your issue. Frequently with keyword searches, you can pull up a section with your keywords, but that section might not have anything to do with the issue in question. So looking at this heading section, we've already determined that the vehicle and traffic law and the fact that we are in the article alcohol and drug-related offenses is in fact very relevant. Another important tip for using statutory codes is, again, to look at the table of contents. Because a code covers a subject area, or really a title covers a subject area, frequently there may be other sections that are relevant to your issue. And the easiest way to find them is looking at the table of contents. And you can read through here and see if any of these seem important for your issue. And of course, as lawyers, you must read the section. Even if you found references to the section or descriptions of the section in your wonderful secondary sources, as attorneys, you must read the whole section to make sure that you understand everything in its proper context. Let's go back to our secondary source handling the DWI case in New York. And remember, we found two sections in this treatise that were useful. We just were looking at section 2.1. In general, now we're going to look at section 2.2, what is a motor vehicle? And remember, this section clued us into the fact that the definition of what constitutes a motor vehicle is found in VTL, which we now know is Vehicle and Traffic Law in McKinney's, but this is VTL 125. So thanks to our secondary source, we got this very important reference for the definition of motor vehicle. In addition to that, looking a little bit further into this section of our secondary source, we can see that it starts to cite two different cases. So we will want to take a look and see if the secondary source clues us into any useful cases that interpret our statute section. So we would see a couple of cases that talk about how a motor vehicle is defined or not defined. Not exactly on point. People v. Zemansky talks about horse-drawn stagecoach. People v. Lopez talks about whether a vehicle which is incapable of being operated under motorized power. But these cases still may be worth looking at to see if they address bicycles. But before we look at cases, of course, we must read this section of the statute. So let's take a look at VTL section 125. As always, I'm going to look at the heading information to make sure it's relevant. We're pretty sure it is, but just to double check, we are in the Vehicle and Traffic Law, and in this particular title of the Vehicle and Traffic Law, we're looking at words and phrases defined. Of course, whenever you find definition sections, they are worth looking at because the law is comprised of words, so you need to know how those words are defined. And reading the section, as we always must do, we confirm what we saw in the secondary source, that it states that every vehicle operated on a public highway which is propelled by any power other than muscular power is defined as a motor vehicle. Again, I will look at the table of contents to see if there are any other sections around this section, so any other definitions that might be useful. Another useful tool in your statutory code is going to be this tab, Notes of Decisions. What this Notes of Decisions tab will do for us is let us know what cases have interpreted our section. So what cases have interpreted VTL section 125. Now we see there are 39 of them. I don't know about you, but I don't really want to have to read through 39 cases to see if there are any relevant. So the great thing about Notes of Decisions tab is I don't have to read all 39. I can scroll down and look at the different topics that these cases discuss. And sure enough, here's a topic, muscular power driven vehicles. So let's take a look at that. And what the Notes of Decisions topics will do for us is it will give us a little summary of what the case is about. So under muscular power driven vehicles topic, it lets me know about automobile and other motorized vehicles as are motor vehicles within the meaning. So it's giving us the definition, and it gives me the citation and link to the case. And interestingly, this is People v. Lopez, this very same case we saw in the secondary source handling DWI cases in New York, section 2.2. So let's take a look at this Lopez case that we found in Notes of Decisions. So looking at the Lopez case, we can read the synopsis to start to get a sense of what this case is about, and we can read these numbered paragraphs which give us more detail on the different aspects of the decision. And sure enough, it's talking about vehicles that are ordinarily muscle-powered, which we know are bicycles. So I'm going to read on into the decision to see what this case has to say about bicycles. Here we see the case says that in exempting muscle-powered vehicles, the legislature obviously sought to exempt bicycles. So we have in the decision clear statement that bicycles should not be included in the definition of motor vehicle. Now, while that's not part of the holding of the case, it still is a really useful statement for us to be able to cite to. So are we finished? Well, not quite yet. Remember, in our research pyramid, we need to update and validate. And similarly, in our essential elements steps, we're now up to step 4. We need to expand and update your research. And what do we mean by update or validate? Looking here at Lopez, we need to make sure that any case we're going to cite is still valid for the point that we are citing. So the way you do that is to use tools on Westlaw or Lexis. The tool on Westlaw is called KeyCite, and those are these tabs here: negative treatment, history, citing references, or to shepherdize on Lexis. So we don't see any signals here on Lopez, so I'm going to show you a different case so you can see an example of what the KeyCite signals look like and how you would validate the case. So here, this is the People v. Zemansky case, and here we see a KeyCite signal, and that signal is a flag. And we see a yellow flag. Yellow means caution, of course, and it's telling us negative treatment. So we would want to make sure, if we were citing Zemansky, that anything we are citing is still valid. You will be learning a lot about authority and how to make sure a case is still valid in your legal writing class. Note that for this issue, we check statutes before looking at judicial opinions. For issues which are governed by statutes, looking at the statutes first will be more effective and efficient. Going back here to our list of essential elements, we've worked through steps 1 through 4, so finally at step 5, know when to stop. There are 2 ways that you will know when you have done as much research as will be useful. First and foremost, and absolutely the more important of the 2, is having a sense that you have answered your question. Now, that's not to say you will necessarily find an answer good for your client. That just means that you feel confident that you have an answer that has completely covered the issue and the facts of your client's case. The second and less important way to know when to stop is when you start to see references to the same sources repeatedly. So when you start to see the same statute sections, so we've seen 1192 and VTL 125 in a couple of places, when you start to see references to the same cases, we saw the Lopez case in secondary source and in our notice of decision. Of course, you'll also want to do separate case research using keyword search. Once you start seeing the same primary source references, that's a signal that you have found what there is to find. Okay, so we have made it through the 5 steps. So as an overview of what we have accomplished, we started with Google, did a quick keyword search and learned what we could from Google, but we absolutely didn't rely on any of those sources. We remembered that law firms have sites to get clients, not to help us with research, but we learned what we could. Then we went to the more reliable secondary sources on Westlaw or Lexis, and we took a look at encyclopedias, also called jurisprudences. We looked at ALR, American Law Reports, and then we finally looked at more detailed secondary source using the table of contents. We looked at the treatise handling DWI cases in New York. That secondary source treatise handling DWI cases gave us great references to the primary sources, to the statutes, as well as they gave us some hints for cases as well. We looked at the table of contents for both of the statute sections to see if we could find any other important sections. We looked at the Notes of Decisions tab, which helped us to find cases that interpret our statute section. And finally, for the cases that we found, we made sure to validate those cases to make sure that anything we cite from those cases, any holding or dicta, are still valid. So to wrap up with some tips, I am going to highlight the important ones listed here on page 5, the last page of your handout, and summarize. Very important, perhaps most important, understand the sources. Understand the difference between secondary and primary sources. Understand the role of statutes, case opinions or judicial opinions, and regulations. You will be learning about all of these in your legal writing class. Beware, be very aware of AI. Use it very cautiously and not until you understand all of the sources and the relationship between the sources. And again, remember, your legal writing professor has asked you not to use AI until they say it's okay. Remember, on Google, it's fine to use, just don't stop there. Sites like Wikipedia and FindLaw aren't your enemy unless you rely or blindly cite. Use them to learn terminology and explore any footnotes. Understand that while here in law school, Lexis and Westlaw are free, that is not the case when you go out to work for an organization. Understand how those databases are built. And think about using free sources. We saw FindLaw as one. The Legal Information Institute at Cornell is another. And finally, check for signs of intelligent, carbon-based life forms. What I mean by that are actual people. Find knowledgeable people around you with good information and ask questions. And in fact, that's the theme for our wrap-up. If you've got questions, ask them. We have fabulous reference librarians here in the law library. Again, remember, we in the library, all of us, are here to help you. Please help us help you by answering the last 2 evaluation questions. Thanks very much, and we look forward to working with you.